All right, well, welcome. Today we're going to talk from Egoitz Laparra and Dongfang Xu. And Dongfang is a Ph.D. student here. He's at the end of his third year. Egoitz is a postdoc who started a little over a year ago. And they'll be talking today about some research they've done with me on parsing times.
Hello everyone. We're going to talk about our work from characters to time intervals. So we are mainly to explain how we do the time normalization task and how we evaluate our system. So time normalization is a crucial step in information extraction task since it allows the entities and the events to be placed along the timeline. So in this application tools, we can see how the timeline and the events are organized. So can we restart again?
Just keep going. It's okay.
Okay. So after we see this nice, we can know what the path of protest and what happened in the air springs. Restart again. Can we do that?
Sure, just start. It's okay. Just start again.
Okay. Yes, sorry about that. So this nice is about an application tool which introduced the path of protest and what happened in the Arab Springs. So basically, instead of reading the newspapers or documents for a few hours to understand what's going on for this event, we can simply understand the information along this timeline in a few minutes. So this could save a lot of time for the readers to read the newspapers. And this is the application in the medical domains. So just roughly looking at the image, we can understand the overwhelming amount of information for a doctor to understand when they want to give a treatment to a certain patient. So place the medical events along the timeline. We can we can save a lot of time for the doctors, and also sometimes maybe even save the patients' lives. And on the other hand, we can such information organization approach could help the researchers to understand the development of the disease and give them some information to provide how to provide better treatments. So how the application is designed? So basically, you should follow the thinking model of our human beings. So basically, for human to understand the text, we first read the whole document and doing some processing in our brain, and then extract the events and also the time, and put them along the timeline and make them understand when the event happens, whether it's before some time, after some time, or between some time. So there are three issues in timeline models. So the first one, translating directly from text to visualization is not a one-step task. We need to decompose them to a few sub-steps. And we also need to understand how we represent the event and the time along the systems. And the second, we need the human annotators to provide the knowledge for us so that the system can understand how we think about the time and events. And such intermediate representation must be machine learnable. We don't want to let a lot of people to do such tasks. This is the agenda of our presentation today. So basically, I will introduce the background information, and Egoitz will explain what the interval-based evaluation is, and I then I will explain the neural parsing system, especially the time entity identification and the data augmentation, and Egoitz will explain the time entity compositions part. So, what is time normalization? Time normalization is a task to translate time expression into computer-readable forms. So, usually it includes two steps. We need to identify the time expression and normalize them into some format. So, in time expression identification task, what is time expression? So according to the community expert, time expression is the natural language expressions which denotes a certain time point or time intervals. So there's various forms for the time expression. It could be calendar days, time of the days, seasons, months, years, and even some complicated ones such as frequency or durations. It could be precise, such as April 27, 2018 at 10 a.m., or ambiguous, such as 2 days ago, yesterday, which we need to understand some context informations. And it could be even more complex, such as the other day. For example, I went to the restaurant the other day. So even we know the context information is still very unclear for us what the other day means. So time expression normalization. So in order to do the normalization task, we need to know what formal representation we are going to use, whether it's for digital year, to digital months, or to digital days. And such normalization task must be interpretable for machine and humans. And the previous, most time normalization tasks are using the ISO TimeML schema, which they treat the time expression as flat, and they are associated with a date or partial date. So, for example, here, supposed to conclude by May. Here, the May is identified as the time expression, and we give them the values 1998 and May. And another example, invited to rejoin 2 weeks ago, assuming the document creation time is 1998, March 15th. And in terms of that date, 2 weeks ago should be 1998 and March 8th. And another example would be the past 3 summers. So here, although using such schema could understand its summers, but it is very unclear what the past 3 means. So here, these values will only cannot give the exact years here. In fact, we find a few drawbacks for these schemas. So first, it cannot align multiple. It cannot align the expressions such as the past 3 to some certain calendar unit, since the past 3 corresponding to multiple time days. And the second drawbacks of this schema is that is not so for each time expression it ignores the span of the words, and just for example 2 and 3 here should means the same thing, which is the numbers, and the ago and the past should also mean the same thing, which is the past tense, which is something happened in the past. So the lack of the semantics or for the certain tokens make the such schema very hard for the machine learning approach. And noticeable that the internal annotated agreement is 75%, which represented the upper bound performance a system could achieve using these schemas. And basically, using a lot of researchers are using that schemas, and most of their work are rule-based system. So basically, the system using the hand-constructed grammars and doing the classification task one step by one step, and finally get the certain time expression values. So here is another example. The TimeML schemas cannot normalize tools, since Saturday is corresponding to multiple calendar units. So how we do that in some semantic way, in some compositional way. So previously, Dr. Bassett has done some researches on the SCATE schemas, which can give each tokens a semantic meanings. So here, Saturdays means day of week, March means month of year, and the 6th means day of month. So in this way, we can do some machine learning approach, since the semantic meanings is attached with each single tokens. And also to understand that this as a time expressions, we can do some semantic meaning composition part, which links the day of month with the month, and the Saturdays with some operators, which is this. And after we doing the visualization, it could be basically in terms of the document creation time, we understand the last March 6 means, and we understand this Saturday means, which is the multiple time intervals along the timelines, and we're doing some operations, which is the between, doing the intersection between these intervals. So here, there's two main parts for the SCATE annotations, long operators and operators. So go back to the previous slides, Saturdays, March, and 6 is the long operators. And since this is the operators, so here, long operators can have a semantic meaning with themselves, but the operators also have the semantic meaning, but they need to attach with some particular long operators for representing the time expressions.
Dongfang, can you go back to the previous slide?
Yes.
Just give us some time to understand all those tokens. Okay, so this interval.
Yes.
Repeating intervals.
Yeah, I will explain it again. So this is mainly the property of the between. So if we have the start interval, since it means some time between some time and some other time, so we have to take two paths. So between intervals and also another intervals.
So you're saying between these two parameters?
Yes, basically lead two arguments in this case, yes.
Okay, so then there's the start interval. I mean, I'm trying to understand the stack. What are the semantics behind those stack and all those arrows? Does this mean subclass? Does this mean parameters?
Yeah, I think so basically
arrows all mean arguments. So,
Okay.
Yeah.
So either equals gives you a local argument, or the arrow gives you the other argument. So for between there, the first argument is
Interval.
the last March 6th, and the second argument is the doc time. Right, so start interval is the first argument, the second argument, end interval is doc time.
Yeah, March 6, using the document the time as the argument, and to infer what March 6 means along the timeline.
Okay.
So long operators and operators here, Saturday, March 6 are the long operators. So when they appear alone, we know the semantic meaning of them. But for the operators here, since, so when we see since, we don't know what since means. It must be attached with some particular long operators.
But since doesn't have to have two parameters, right? In our everyday language, we could just say since something without Saturday, right?
Right, so implicitly, since always means the time between whatever the time you say is and now. right?
Yes, so we just,
So-
so in default, we just
Yeah.
ignoring
Yeah.
now.
This is why the second argument for since is almost always doc time,
Mhm.
which means the time of
okay.
speech, right?
Okay.
But the between operator is not only tied to since, you could use it for other things as well, right? So there are other ways of saying between that aren't since
Right,
and don't
right.
always have doc time as their end.
Right, right, right. That makes sense.
For example, until would go the other way around,
Yeah.
right? So it started the doc time and then it would have a second argument that's the end.
Right. You could also have in between, right?
Yes, you could
Yeah.
literally say
Yeah.
in between,
Yeah.
yeah. So there's lots of different ways of expressing each
You
of these.
can have an explicit ending of the since.
Yeah, yeah, right, right. Since something had happened, right?
Yes.
It doesn't have to be a specific date.
So the main categories of the SCATE annotations is non-operators and operators. And for non-operators, we can have explicit intervals. For example, year. Here, like 1989 would be year. And the repeating intervals, day of week, month of year, or day of month would be the repeating intervals. And some other non-operators, for example, number and period. Here, 3 months or 2 days. And the operators, here we decompose the operators into 2 parts, explicit operators, implicit operator. So basically, these 2 time expressions means the same thing. Saturday since March 6th and Saturday since last March 6th. So here, last is the explicit operator. Since the meaning we can infer from the token last itself. But for implicit operators, we have to infer from the context informations.
Are there other types of operators besides last, before?
Yes, like after,
Yeah.
between, and every time, every is also the operators.
You also have intersections,
Yes.
unions.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, yeah. Mhm.
So basically, in the data set, non-operators could be alone by themselves, and the operators, implicit operators cannot appear with itself. It must be attached with some particular operators, non-operators, for example, March. But explicit operators could appear with itself last.
You mean sentence since last is valid? A sentence like Saturday since last is valid?
I'm sorry, say again?
What he's trying to say is that there is an explicit token that evokes the operator.
Yes.
So there's a last operator. Both of these things mean
Mhm.
Saturday since
Yeah.
March 6th,
Yeah.
since
Yeah.
last March 6th.
Mhm.
And one of them explicitly says last, and one of them doesn't say last.
Right, I got
Um,
that, yeah.
So what's missing here is in the annotation scheme, the operator will be annotated on top of the word last, if the last is present.
Mhm.
If it's not, it will be annotated on top of March, just because it has to be somewhere.
Oh, I see.
It has to be somewhere, right, but it doesn't actually have any span in the text. So,
Mhm.
so they're different because one has an obvious span in the text to put it on, and the
Yeah.
other one doesn't have an obvious span in the text.
Mhm.
And the implicit we need to infer from the context. So here is some statistics for the corpus we used in our research work. So we use 2 kinds of data set, use-well data set and the clinical data set. So using TimeML schemas, there's 718 time expressions, and for clinical is 5,000 somehow time expressions. So using Dr. Bess's SCATE schemas, we can have different kind of time expression. So since SCATE schemas give the semantic meanings for each single tokens, so it will have cover much more and also have much more representation meanings. So here, SCATE entities means single components of time expression. So for example, 2 days ago, all the single tokens 2 days ago are SCATE entities. So for the SCATE bounded, which means the time expression which has the starting point and the ending point. So for example, for 2 days ago, which means from the today, which the ending point is the today, and the starting point is 2 days ago. Yeah, this is the SCATE bounty. And the algorithm will give the explanation of the interval-based evaluation metric.
So we have seen the SCATE schema. We have shown that we have a data set available annotated with this schema. To complete our framework, we need a way to evaluate the systems that try to follow this schema. So a first approach could be use the traditional metrics for information extraction. That is precision recall and F-score. In our case, the precision would be the correct predictions divided by the total number of predictions. The recall, the number of correct predictions divided by the total number of gold cases. And the F-score is, as always, the harmonic mean of the precision area and recall. So these metrics cover all the components of the SCATE schema. It covers the entities, the links between the entities, and all the properties that these entities have. The drawback is that we can only apply this metric if the system follows the SCATE schema. And we are very interested in compare our system or proposal with other systems that don't follow the SCATE schema, for example, TimeML. That is somehow like the standard for time normalization. So we need a new way to evaluate time normalization. And we are going to base this new metric on intervals. Okay? So how we can get these intervals? For the TimeML schema, it's very straightforward. These values are the normalization annotated with TimeML. So we can directly get the intervals from these values. For example, in this case, the interval would start in the beginning of the 5th, this is April 5th, 1989, and the end of the interval would be the end of that day. And for the second case, the beginning of the interval is the beginning of the month, or the beginning of May, and the end of the interval is the end of May. Very simple. But what happens with the SCATE schema? In the SCATE annotation, we have more complex time expressions that can be composed by a set of intervals, not just one single interval that in the TimeML. So, for example, in this for this time expression, Mondays and Fridays next January, this time expression in SCATE would be the intersection of the union of Mondays and Fridays and the next January, having as reference the document creation time. Okay? So for example, the Mondays and Fridays would be repeated intervals. Mondays represent all the Mondays in the past and all the Mondays in the future, and the same for Fridays. And the same for January. It represents all the Januaries in the past and all the Januaries in the future. The document creation time is a single date, a specific date. For example, today. Okay? So the union of Mondays and Fridays would be the list of all the intervals for Mondays and Fridays in the past and in the future. And the next January, having as reference today, would be January 2019. Okay? If we intersect all the list of all the Mondays and Fridays in the history and January 2019, we have this. These 8 intervals that are the Mondays and Fridays of January 2019. Okay? Here we have another example, the 3 years following 1985. This is in SCATE. This is the next 3 years, having as reference 1985. This would result in a single interval that starts at the beginning of 1986 and with end at the beginning, the open boundary of 1989. Okay, so this is the way that we can get the intervals from the annotations in both schemas. So how can we use these intervals for evaluate the system? Okay, imagine that we have this piece of text in in annotation. And in the gold annotation, this is a single time expression. And also imagine that we have a system that predicts this piece of text but misses the Mondays. So for the system, the time expression is only next January. These two time expressions represent two different intervals. This time expression represents these 4 intervals that are the four Mondays in January 2019, and this time expression represents the whole month. Okay. So our first step to apply this metric is to calculate the size of these intervals. Okay. For the first case, is just the sum of the 4 single intervals, and for the predicted interval, the size is the whole month. Okay. Once we have the sizes of the goal and the predicted intervals, we get the overlap between those annotations. In this case, the overlap between these two intervals is also Mondays next January, all the Mondays in January 2019. So, in consequence, the size of the overlap is also the same size of the goal annotation. Here I am using the seconds as time units, but we could use any other unit, doesn't matter. So now we have these 3 numbers. We have the size of the prediction, the size of the goal interval, and the size of the overlap. With these 3 numbers, we can calculate the precision and recall of this interval. How? For the precision, we divide the overlap, the size of the overlap, by the size of the prediction. And for the recall, we divide the size of the overlap by the size of the goal annotation. Okay? For our example, this would be a precision of 0.13 and a recall of 1, because the prediction covers the whole goal annotation. We can then calculate this for all the intervals in annotation and use them to calculate the overall scores. The overall prediction would be the sum of all the individual predictions, individual precisions, divided by the number of answers. And the overall recall would be the sum of all the individual recalls divided by the number of goals. Okay? And we could calculate the F-score as the harmony. Okay. So it's important that this can be applied only to bounded intervals. Okay? Dongfang had presented previously that bounded intervals, those intervals that has a beginning and an end. If we have infinite intervals, we cannot calculate this. But at least this allows us to compare systems that follow different schemas. And that is what we want. So now Dongfang is going to start our approach, to explain our approach for time normalization. Okay?
So we can treat the time expression identification as a parsing system, which includes 2 parts. First, identifying the single tokens as the time entities. And the second step is to compose the time entity together and form them to time expressions. So here, for the time entity identification, it's a sequence tagging task. So for a sequence of objects, our goal is to give a label for each object. So here, the sequence, so what's the boundary of the sequence? It could be the whole document or just one single sentence. So we tried both approaches, and it turns out that using the sentence as the sequence boundary, it gives much better performance. And another way is for the object unit in the sequence, should we use the characters or word? So we also try both, and the results of the 2 different approaches shown in the following slides. And we're using the BIO tagging schemas, which is using a lot in the sequence tagging task. So the difference between our sequence tagging task from previous others sequence tagging tasks is that in our sequence, each object unit could be assigned multiple labels. So for example, Saturday since March 6th here March will have multiple labels. Both means the day of the month of the year and also the long of the operator last. So it will be the multi-labels classification problems for each single object unit. So we try three different input features, the text features. So for characters, the text is just the character itself. But for the word, is just a single word. We also use the Unicode character categories. So for example, uppercase letters. So in the Unicode categories, you will give them the label LU, which means the uppercase, and the lowercase li, punctuation, and the digits. So since we can easily imagine that why this information is useful. For example, Saturdays with the capital letter S. So we can infer that this could be the time expression. And also the digit, for example, 2014, we can infer that as the time entities. And also the part of speech tag, since we need to identify the operators last and after, we are using some tense information. So whether it's past tense or whether it's the future. So here is the one architecture we use in our models. So basically, we give a sequence of characters as the input, and we using 3 different feature extractors to extract information for each single characters. So here, M will be the text itself, M, and its Unicode categories, and its part of speech tag. So basically, part of speech tag is for single tokens, but we transform them for each character, just repeating the part of speech tag for a word for each single characters. So after we get the features, we feed them to the embedding layers. So here, those 3 different features will represent as 3 different representation factors. And in embedding layer, we concatenate them as a single factors. And we're doing that for the whole sequence and feed them to the bidirectional GRU, which is the recurrent neural network using a lot in the sequential tagging task. So we're using the stacked GRU layers, bidirectional stacked GRU layers to extract the context information. So for example, May following by the empty space, using this layer can extract the context informations. So then we feed the output from the stacked GRU to the sigmoid, which is just a activation function, just the output output probability distributions, but it's for the multi-labels, not the single class classification problems. So here, we can say that it generated 2 different labels, last and the month. But this, in general, this didn't give us a good performance. So we trying to decompose this to output into 2 different architectures, which is here. Feed to one bidirectional stacked GRU for the producing non-operators and another architectures for the operators. So this is basically decomposes the multi-label classification as multiple multi-class classification problems. And we also try another different structure called 3 softmax we didn't show here. So it basically decomposes the operator as explicit operator and the implicit operator, which we showed before at the type of SCATE annotations. So here we try to give some our explanations of why character-based is better than the word-based models. So previous, the state-of-the-art models for the sequence tagging task is using hybrid word and character models. Basically, they're using the convolutional neural network to extract the representation from the characters for a single word and combine those information to feed to the another recurrent neural network. So, but such models is not very useful for us. We have like 3 reasons to explain that. So there's a lot of digits in time expression. So for example, 2018, 2018. So if we do the word level models, so we will have a representation for each numbers. But for the character-based model, we can only have 10 different factor representation, which is from 0 to 9. And this somehow mitigate the data sparsity issues. And also for the character-based informations, we can know for the hours, it must be smaller than 24, since we cannot have the 25 in a day, 25 hours in a day. But for the word-based models, there's no information there. And the second issue is the word tokenizations. So in our SCATE schemas, overnight post operations, this will be decomposed as two different time entities. So basically, over corresponding to the whole light, which is the operators. Light is just corresponding to the long operators, and also post operations. Here, the post will be treated as the will be treated as the operator after. And also, when the sequence digits appear together to describe the calendar days, so the word tokenization is harder to tokenize this for 8 digits as 2 different units, calendar units. And another issue is the order of vocabulary words. So here we compare the character-based model with the word-based model using the development data set shown in the previous slides. So basically, these scores give the information of the character spans and the type identified by the system. So for the word level model and the character level models, we can see that character level model is better than the word-based models. This is just for the one architectures. And for the another architectures, the same conclusions we can draw from the, yeah.
Okay, you can finish this.
Okay. And the same also goes for the 3 softmax models. So compared with the sigmoid 2 softmax and 3 softmax, we can also see that the 3 softmax is better than the previous 2 different models, which means to decompose this task as a multi-class classification is important for us.
Just a comment. For this evaluation, we have used the information extraction metrics, not
the interval-based evaluation, just identifying the correct span and type.
Yeah,
Yeah.
My question is, how do you utilize those constraints? Like a day does not have 25 hours. How do you actually utilize that?
So I think for the local features, like if if 2 followed by 5, we can definitely, for the character-based model, we can infer that 2 could not be the hour of day.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And for the interval-based evaluation, the document creation time is very important. So a lot of expression like 2 days ago, we need to understand the document creation time. But such document creation time has various formats. So here, following the Monday followed by July 24 and 2017, and another different format, for example, all digits and with punctuation as the connectors. So a lot of formats was not covered in the training data set. How can we solve these problems? And one property for this document creation time is that when we see this expression alone, we can understand what the data it refers to without any context information. So we figure out a solution for these issues, which is a time generator. So we using few programming codes to randomly generate the different formats for the document creation time, and such formats are available in Office Suite. So we generate like 1,800 document creation times, which cover the abbreviations, such as the AM, and without the delimiters. For example, the punctuation here, and the mixture of digits and the strings. So for example, this time of day following by the AM, and also different sequence of time units. So like the mixture of the years before the months of the year. And we also found that after using the extra data set we generated, our performance is better without using the extra data set. So for example, the long operator F1 score is higher than the without using the extra data set. And the same goes for the implicit operators. And here at once we explain how we do the time entity composition.
Okay. So our character-based model detects the time entities in the text, but these time entities are isolated. They are not forming any time expression. So we need to link these time entities together to produce these time expressions. For this, we have proposed a rule-based approach that uses some constraints that are defined in the guidelines of the SCATE schema. These constraints set which time entities can be linked to which time entities. So let's see an example. Suppose that our character-based model gives this prediction. Here we have three non-operators: May, that is a month of year; 6, that is a day of month; and 2017, that is a year; and one implicit operator, last. So our rule-based approach starts from the first time entity in the text, starting from the left. In this case, the implicit operator last. We check in the SCATE constraints which time entities can be linked to the operator last. SCATE schema says that the last operator can be connected to this kind of entities. For example, month of year, day of week, day of month, and year should be, no, year not. So the rule-based system will find the closest time entity that is included in this list. In this example, the last operator will be connected to the month of year. In the next step, we take the following time entity. We also check in SCATE, and SCATE says that the month of year can be connected to day of month. We look for the closest day of month, and we check the connection. The SCATE schema also says which kind of connection we can set. For example, for month of year, the connection between month of year and day of month is a subinterval. In the previous case, it was a repeat interval. Okay. For the next time entity, day of month, we also check in the SCATE schema, and it says that it can be connected to part of day and hour of day. We don't find any part of day or hour of day in this text, so we don't create any link for for this case. And finally, we do the same for the year. The SCATE constraint says that the year can be connected to say season of year, month of year, and week of year, and we find that the closest time entity that is in this list is month of year. So we set this link. So now we have the complete graph. We can interpret this graph as we have seen previously, and get the interval for this time expression. And now we can evaluate how our system performs using the interval-based metric. And these are the results that we are getting, both in the newswire domain and in the clinical domain. To compare with the state of the art, we have also applied Heidel time to the same dataset. Heidel time is a rule-based system that follows the TimeML schema. And it has been the state of the art for time normalization for a long time. Okay. And as you can see, we outperform Heidel time in both domains. Especially, we get a much better precision. This can be explained. Sorry for this. Okay. TimeML cannot represent this kind of time expressions. Okay. So, in Heidel time, as it follows the TimeML schema, is going to fail predicting this kind of time expression. It can predict things like this one, next January. What happens that if it predicts next January, it's going to have a good recall because it covers the code annotation, but the precision is going to be very bad. Our system follows the SCATE schema, so it's able to detect this kind of expressions. So we think that this proves that we can train models in the SCATE schema that predicts more complex time expression than with TimeML. Okay.
Yeah. And the summaries of our research work is that we are the first models using for the time normalization using the SCATE style annotation, which is now we do the semantic composition for the time expressions. And we design a new interval-based evaluation matrix, which allows us to compare different systems using different schemas. And we found that our neural parsing system is better than the rule-based state-of-the-art models. We also found that when we decompose the multi-labels classification problems, we found that it's better than a single output one, which is just the one sigmoid, the multi-labels. And we found that our character-based neural network is better than word-based systems. And the future directions, we're trying to figure out a way to generate the annotations within the context. Previously, we just generate the document creation time without context. And we want to do the time entity identification task and the time composition entity task together to join the learning the task together, which might give us better performance. And also, we hope we can do better domain general coverage. Here we only focus on the newswire dataset and the clinical dataset. We hope it could be covered more general domain. And thanks.
Thank you.
Any questions for our research?
Can we go back to the slide? Yeah, this one.
Yeah.
So I wonder, is this surprising finding for you that when you divide a multi-class classification problem into a set of one-class
Yes.
classification problem, does that surprise you? I mean, the performance is better when you have multiple classifications.
So it's not dividing a multi-class classification problem into binary problems. It's taking a multi-label classification problem
Right.
where you could have multiple labels at the same time and splitting that into 3 multi-class problems.
Yeah. That's a more accurate description. So does that surprise you?
for the sigmoid, for the one sigmoid to compare with two softmax, is not surprised because we know the sigmoid. Since the sigmoid need to generate like more than 35 probability for the labels, it's a lot. But for the two softmax, one softmax will only generate 10 of 15 probability distribution, which is much fewer than the one sigmoid. So we think the two softmax will be better than the one sigmoid.
I think there's another answer, which is that anytime you use a softmax instead of a bunch of sigmoids, the softmax applies an implicit constraint that all of these things must sum to 1. So you have a constraint over, if you compare even if we didn't split, right? If you compared like a softmax versus a bunch of sigmoids for exactly the same problem, the softmax says exactly one of these should be 1 and the rest should be 0 essentially. And the sigmoid says, well, any of these are unconstrained.
Yeah.
So really the softmax gives you an extra constraint. So anywhere you can apply a constraint that happens to be true for your data, you probably want to, right? It'll make the learning easier.
Yes.
In theory, the model should be able to learn with the sigmoids, right? There's nothing theoretical about the neural network that it shouldn't be possible to learn that. It's just harder to learn because you don't have the constraints.
Right.
And also we don't have enough data set.
Yeah, right. If we had huge data, you could probably learn those even without the constraints.
Right, so how can you say when that you actually had enough data set for any of the problem?
Well, for any of the time stuff, we never have enough data. It's too time consuming to annotate.
And we're showing that for the 10PE for data set, we only have 70 documents. But for the time corpus, we have like 200, more than 200 documents. And we find that the identification scores is much better than using the 10PE for data set. So this gives us some clues that enough data set.
The identification scores are better, but these are showing
very
the interval scores, which are not that different. But
Those interval scores, I think it's a clever idea to actually to calculate interval, right? But the interval really depends on your extraction, entity identification performance.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
If you extract it wrong year,
Yes.
then your interval going to be off like 3,000.
right, yeah,
seconds.
and in some ways that's one of the things that should make you more surprised that we beat idle time, because we have to get all of the pieces right to get the interval right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But the pieces are easier to get right because Monday is always a day of week.
Yes.
Right? It's just always a day of week. Whereas if you have like the traditional TimeML, sometimes Monday is labeled as a date and sometimes it's labeled as a time. It's labeled as a time when there's also a time in the same expression, right? So now it becomes a harder.
There is another issue with ideal time in this data set is more verbose data because it produces more time expression. For example, come back to the. Ideal time is not going to detect this as a single time expression, but can predict two different time expressions.
Right. Yeah.
So the precision is going always to be worse than us
Mhm.
in this data.
Because I was thinking when you say generate, you try this method on other places, and I think immediately the old Chinese literature where you have Tang Dynasty, right?
Yes.
So you could, if you extract one thing wrong, you could be off by 1,000 years.
Yes, right, yeah. We have not tried this on historical dates. The next thing that's most urgent based on the projects we're working on is actually working on the kind of stuff you look in like crop modeling and that kind of thing. So you get things like rainy season.
Yeah, yeah.
So the funny thing is you find different stuff in different domains. We
Right,
started
exactly,
looking in
yeah.
the crop.
You keep thinking that everyone seems to think that this is a closed domain and there's only so many different time expressions. There's not, and people keep coming up with new ones.
Yeah.
All the
Yeah.
historical dates, all the
Yeah.
seasons. Anything can have a
Like
season. Flu has a
seasons.
season.
Basketball seasons, sports seasons, and
Yeah.
in the financial news